The Secure in Mind podcast series is an educational initiative of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, or CyAN. CyAN is an international not-for-profit trust network of experts in technology, policy, ethics, and good practice. Our mission is to strengthen society's safety, resilience, and ability to fight against cybercrime and similar threats. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network.
Welcome back to the Gate 15 interview and to this episode of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network on YouTube for a special crossover sort of dual interview episode as John and I, a longtime colleague of mine, an information security pro, chat and sort of interview one another, I think. So my name's Andy and I'm your host of the Gate 15 discussion. Thanks for listening, being part of our Gate 15 community and part of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network community. John, this is really a fun way to do things. I'm glad we could do this today.
Yeah, thanks very much for setting this up and for being game for this. It was great to hook up with you again after quite a while of radio silence. From our side, this is going on our Secure in Mind series of Cybersecurity Advisors Network podcasts and videos. So I'm glad that we can do this kind of collaborative hybrid sharing of content.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a fun way to do it. The interviews, I always enjoy them, but it's kind of fun we get to mix it up like this and just sort of have fun. You and I think of a lot of similar interests and backgrounds, to be honest, a lot of similar touch points and passions today, from security to encryption to other topics. So I'm looking forward to discussion. So I'm going to typically I try and lead these discussions, but I think today I'm in the passenger seat. So looking forward to it.
Well, we're both in the passenger seat. I think we're gonna kind of play it by ear and keep it informal. And maybe a bit of background, Andy. You and I met. When was it? We never actually met in person, I think. But
no, we never have. But I think we connected maybe back in like 2013, something like that.
Crazy like that. When I was working with the Financial Services ISAC, or Information Sharing Analysis Center, you were working. I think you already had Gate 15 back then.
I did. I had been an employee of FSI ISAC for a year prior, and then I switched over to do things as Gate 15 in 2013, and then we met as I was just getting things off the ground.
So I think the first touch point was really our shared interest in the information sharing, cybersecurity, threat information sharing community, the public-private partnerships aspect of this, and I think that's maybe a good place for us to start, especially given the current geopolitical interesting times that we live in.
Yeah, for sure. It is maybe the most complicated time in threat information sharing, I think, that I've seen. We've seen it constantly sort of growing and evolving, but now there's some significant turbulence in a lot of our partnerships and relationships that, information sharing is based on trust and reliability. And so some of the turbulence we're feeling today, that's not going to go away just because maybe things settle down, next month or whenever that might be. So it's definitely an interesting time here in 2025.
And regarding, I think, who we are, well, let's best share each other's profiles and information, and we'll put that in the respective video descriptions in case anybody cares to look up who are these idiots that are talking about things that they pretend to know about. So maybe just to kick it off, you and I have a lot of background in various industries around. I like to call it collective cyber defense. So whether it's on an ISAC basis, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of an ISAC, it was started in the US in the early 2000s with a presidential decree by Bill Clinton in 1998 to basically saying winter is coming, do something. Yeah. To what then I think was the kind of the nascent concept of a critical economic sector. I believe it was about 15 to start out with. I think in the US is about 27. There's a bunch of ISACs all over the world with varying degrees of connectivity. And the idea is generally that the private sector, there are certain things the private sector does very well, certain things it does terribly, but information sharing and kind of sorting out its collective capabilities in terms of identifying, analyzing, and collectively responding to large scale cyber threats are one thing that these ISACs have proven to be very, very apt at. We've seen a lot of growth in connectivity with public sector entities, whether it's national cybersecurity centers, whether it's CERTs, as well as other sectors, ISACs, some of which are more mature than others. Both of us have had a lot of experience with the financial sector, which tends to be, the most mature and the best funded. But if you look at, for example, the EU NIS2 directive, there's something like 27 or 28 sectors in the end, some of which have no idea what they're doing, right? So I guess starting out, maybe I'll ask you a very broad question, and then you can jump on me.
Okay.
Where do you see this is a very broad question? What do you see as kind of the state of maturity of critical industry being able to collectively defend itself based on the experience that various sectors have had in this space over the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years? How are we doing?
Well, that's a good question. How are we doing? I would say we're doing okay. I would say we're not doing great. We're doing okay, and like you said, it varies greatly from sector to sector, community to community. On the cybersecurity side, I grew up as a knuckle dragging artillery guy, right? I came into the ISAC world focusing on all hazards security and got much more familiar with the cybersecurity side of things. And I think on the informal cybersecurity threat information sharing side, I think that's been very strong for a long time. People talking to people, sharing information, building things, disrupting things, doing things. Formalizing that was a harder process, and getting that to become organizationally standard is a harder process. And you saw FS, I think, really be a leader in that space as some of the bigger banks in the US started saying, hey, your mission, analyst, is to share information when something happens. And they started doing it. And that just turned on others to say, hey, there's value in this. And so even those that weren't used to it started doing it. And for example, in the FS sector, I think there's pretty robust information sharing, trusted networks, communities, processes, leveraging best practices like those that came from Europe and the TLP that's now so commonly used, worldwide and with government partners. And so I think it's gone really well in some of those sectors. Others start out much slower. For example, healthcare started out much slower, but it really took off, right? After WannaCry, the healthcare sector really started to recognize we need to step up our game. We can never see something like this happen again, and maybe we should be running Windows XP. And they really stepped up and started sharing information much more robustly. Today, US-based Health ISAC, worldwide entity, doing fantastic work. Other sectors, it's still a process. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes the trust and community hasn't been built. Sometimes you talk about, for example, with some utilities, there's no person that has a single job of being the cybersecurity pro, right? They're the IT guy. They're also mopping the floor. They're also checking the devices. They're also doing a million other things. They just don't have that dedicated capability and robust team. So it's much slower in some communities. And so it really does vary all over the place. And now, today, I think we're definitely at a moment of sort of questioning, I'm going to say. There's concerns with information sharing. There's questions about how it's going to go. There's concerns about international information sharing. And so I think we're at a significant disruption point where even the good work that's occurred, again, this isn't a political statement, just there's a lot of turbulence in the environment right now, which I think is going to further inhibit some of our effective information sharing, both in the United States on my end and with our international partners, which is so critical. Going back to WannaCry, that was a worldwide effort, right?
There's a couple of things that you mentioned, each of which I think would merit its own path. I think I was smirking before because, having spent a lot of time doing security in a healthcare environment, the Windows XP comment kind of hurt. And I think you're spot on about the security person having too many hats. And honestly, let's talk about healthcare for a second. That's a large part of why there's been so many challenges in healthcare. It's because in a lot of places it's extremely decentralized. Hospitals often don't talk to each other. They're underfunded. And you don't have this intrinsic, security consciousness, plus the fact that you have a lot of extremely smart people, doctors, who are sometimes also administrators who maybe, and I've seen this in academia as well, they don't want to listen, right? And it's much worse than in other sectors where your CEO, your CFO, et cetera, don't necessarily want to listen to the professionals. They're trying to get them to spend money because, let's be honest, things cost money.
Yep.
Right. This is also, by the way, a serious issue I've seen in a lot of sectors. When the EU ISACs community was being set up a couple of years ago, um, one thing that the Americans did very well in the past, maybe nowadays that may be evolving, is an extremely strong degree of cooperation between public sector and private entities. So, for example, the U.S. the NCSC did Homeland Security. I mean, they realized that there's a lot more to be gained in being cooperative partners than in, just doing silly things and spying on people. And I think a lot of our European entities, they really have some ways to go when it comes to not just talking to member states, what do you call them? Competent authorities, the National CSIRTs cooperation group. And by the way, I'm using these. I know there's a lot going on in APAC in Australia, places like that, but just because these tend to be the leaders in terms of that kind of maturity, there being a lot of really good work going on, like in places like the Gulf Cooperation Council countries as well. But we've seen very much in what I've seen very much in Europe, in response to what you were saying about things like acceptance of trust and processes and maturity. ISACs cost money, right? You need to hire coordinators, you need to hire analysts, you need to hire administrators, and I've seen it. I think it's part of the disease of information security generally that a lot of organizations still see this too much as a cost center, which it is, admittedly. But once a given incident is dealt with, it's dealt with, and we can move on, and we don't have to think about it anymore. But rather than investing in these kind of fundamental structural things, it's not going to give anybody their bonus at the end of the year.
Yeah, but it will save that bonus, right? I mean, that's the unfortunate reality of security.
Yeah.
I mean, we come in, our team comes in and helps with a post-mortem on the back end of an incident, right? And we all know after you've been hit by ransomware and it goes devastatingly bad, somebody gets fired, somebody gets hired, you bring on a few more analysts, you invest in some new tools and resources. Suddenly, we're saying we need to do this. What if we just done that before, right? How much more would we have saved? So while yes, it is a cost center, you're saving potentially so much more when you invest smartly and proactively, and that's a hard argument to make, but that's the argument that leaders need to make, that, look, this is the current average cost of a ransomware incident today. This is the average cost of business email compromise incident today. I'm asking you for a fifth of that, a third of that, a half of that to build the team I need, to get the resources I need, to get the tools I need, to draw down that risk to an acceptable level so we don't have to have that incident occur. And if it does occur, we can respond effectively and demonstrate resilience, be able to bounce back quickly. That's the argument leaders need to make. I don't know if they're effectively making that argument, and that's a challenge. But heaven forbid, you're the guys that pay that $20 million ransom. Now talk about a cost center.
But the issue here is, and you touch on this, and the issue here is that there is an upfront cost, no matter how small, and we're dealing with probabilities, right? And I think we see this, for example, very, very often with private equity and venture capital investors who do not want to spend a cent on securing their portfolio companies because they're looking purely at the short-term finances, right? And part of the issue is that we're still doing a pretty execrable job positing security cost as a business logic rather than as a let's say the engineering approach. Something I like to tell my clients is basically avoid positioning your products as, behold, I have created a thing. Yeah. Here is the thing. It is a good thing. Thus, you should buy the thing. And your CFO goes, okay, so what?
Yeah.
Right. Because the person who's going to, there's a very small chance that they're going to get sacked because there's likely not going to be a ransomware incident. But when there is, c'est la vie. This is an argument I was getting into with my American friends. I am hugely pro these very prescriptive European cybersecurity regulations, right? Because having been in a management role at a large international organization before, these are actually really good tools for me to get my budget. Right? I could say basically, okay, you don't have to spend this money, but talk to the regulator, right?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, when it's required, it's required, right? I mean, again, you go back to financial.
You can't argue that.
Yeah, part of the reason that the financial service sector is so strong is because it's highly regulated, right? It's highly regulated, and in the U.S. at least, the Department of Treasury has basically told the financial services sector, like, you should be in your ISAC. So,
well, not only that, you guys also have, for example, New York State DFS, which has actually imposed punitive damages on somebody who got hit and was subsequently found to not have invested properly in the controls that they should have had.
yeah,
Whether those controls are preventative, whether they're information sharing membership, whatever, we tend to not have that kind of regulatory consequence yet. I think it's coming.
yeah,
But I think that is something that we could definitely learn from when the old adage that if you can afford the fine, then it's a fee,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It has to hurt before companies really start doing what they need to be doing all along. And there's probably if there's a CFO watching this, he's probably fuming by now. My wife certainly would.
But I mean, it's true. And, in the US, we do like to push back against regulation requirements. We'd like to, let us do the right thing because we should do the right thing. But it's challenging because, there are a lot of organizations simply won't, right? They won't make the decision to invest in security up front. And we know that there's, IT leaders, IT directors, CISOs, CIOs that are just struggling to just basically do the minimum. And they've got, incident response plans that are way out of date. They don't have ways to track data exfiltration. They don't know how to verify threats that are being made. They don't have the tools or the people in place to effectively respond. I start talking about, newer, sexier terms like, hey, we should be threat hunting. Let's go on a hunt. Most organizations don't have the luxury to do that, and those that have leadership, they're willing to invest in getting the people and the resources to take a proactive approach to security and to proactively share with their ISAC. That's an innovative leader. But I think what's encouraging, John, is seeing more pressure on boards to include somebody that can speak to cybersecurity, more boards wanting to understand what do we look like from a comparative standpoint, more organizations saying in their 10K filings, hey, we will do an annual cybersecurity exercise and doing that. So it's slow, and I think for guys like you and me, as we get older, we want it to move faster. But you go back and almost 30 years ago, back now to 1998 when President Clinton put that initial guidance out, it's not that long in the sense of trying to make things like this robust and mature. It takes a long time. And so I think, going back to your, how are we doing? We're doing okay. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do better, and we need to move faster and take on more serious approach to some of this. But at the same time, we're getting better. We are doing pretty good, but it's a highly challenging environment, and the threat is moving faster and evolving, and it's complicated.
Let's segue into some politics.
Oh boy! All right. Okay, I know we're going to go there today.
Here we go.
I got good behavior here. I got to be a good behavior.
No, but I think both of us have on our various BlueSky feeds aligned pretty closely on the cynicism and the snark. Yeah. But there's a reason I think there's a really good connection here, and that is historically when it comes to constructively encouraging good practice and collaboration. There's a few countries that I think have led the way in this. I think the Americans have been quite good on this the last couple of years. The Dutch, the UK with their Industry 100 program. And there's a couple of others that have kind of flown on the radar, but are also doing a very, very strong job. You see a lot of this in the Nordics as well. Some countries have very good things, for example, critical national infrastructure coordination entities, but you really don't hear a lot about, for example, UP Kritis in Germany, outside of Germany so much. So for me, one of the roles of government is to fill the gaps and provide the playing field precisely when there is a lack of motivation and incentive for industry to do this, or none of the industry. It can be also, for example, IGOs, NGOs, when there's a lack of incentive or resources for organizations to do this on their own. Right. And you just basically say, okay, look, no conditions. Here's the playground. Here's the tools. Here, we'll provide the coordination. This is what you should be doing, and just getting all the kids together to play together. This, with the ISACs especially, and I don't want to keep coming back to this, but I think this is a good model. The U.S. historically has had a very, very strong leadership role in this. We've seen a pretty frightening systematic dismantling of cybersecurity capabilities. For example, with the cancellation of I believe it was the CISA, Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency body tasked with tracking down the Chinese telco.
Yeah.
right? Guidance to stop chasing after Russian operations, whether it's disinformation operations or others in the U.S. Where do you think, obviously I see this from a very European perspective, looking in from the outside. Where do you see this leading? What kind of signaling effect do you see this having? And what's the tone over in the States regarding these moves?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is everybody's trying to figure out like what's real and what's panic, right? And it's fair. There's as Doge happens and people are getting released and things are shutting down, there's a lot of concern. But we're seeing some balance come back, right? So I'll give a hat tip to another really good podcast, the Click Here podcast. Just was talking about President Trump and what it means for cybersecurity. It was a good discussion. And I think as you look at it in the environment today, the government doesn't want to lose its cybersecurity capability, and we've seen guidance that's come out that said, "Hey, don't fire your cybersecurity staff." Right. So as I kind of think about where we are, and I think about information sharing, there's a big disruption. I think there is some lack of confidence and trust right now because we don't know exactly who's on the other side, on the government side, receiving information. But I think it does a couple things. On the ISAC side, oops, sorry, I'm raising my hand here. On the ISAC side, I think it really makes the case and creates an opportunity for the ISACs to be even more valuable, right? If the government isn't going to be a great partner, and I'm not saying they're not going to be, but if they're not, even more reason for the ISACs to be.
We just don't know yet. We were trying to figure out what the hell is happening, right?
That's right. But my guess is that CISA will settle down and continue to be a good partner to industry. I think the FBI will as well, at the operator level at least, right? And I go back to about, probably around 12 years ago. I went to my first tribal event. I went and sat with my friends at Tribal Hub. Now it was TribalNet back then. I never heard a conversation with tribal entities before. And I was in this room with IT leaders from the tribes, and they were happy to work together. They wanted to work together. They wanted to figure out ways to collaborate with one another, with their state and local partners and the government partners. But the frustration was at the leader level, right? You had tribal chiefs who had centuries old beef with each other or with the United States and the state and local governments. And so at the leadership level, there was a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration, and a lack of desire to create it. But at the operator level, the operators knew, hey, we have to make this work somehow. We've got to figure this out. And they were doing their best to still share information, partner, and build security and resilience. And I think at worst case, I think that's kind of what we might be looking at here. You're looking at passionate leaders, operators that want to make this work because we know we have to make it work. There has to be effective information sharing. We're not going to throw that out because somebody does or doesn't like whoever's in the White House or wherever they are, in the DHS or whatever it is. So it's still going to happen. It might not happen at the leadership level that we want to see it. And I'm not saying that it won't, but it might not. There might be some concern about certain bits of information sharing and how we're going to do that. But I think when it comes back down to the tactical and operational level, I still think we're going to see it happen because at that level, we know we need to do it. We know it's critical for our national and international security. And so I think once things settle down a little bit more, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of the collaboration that's been building still occur. And I really hope it does, because as we sit here, the ISACs were built around cybersecurity, but 9/11 was a painful reminder that we've also got to share for physical security concerns, and we fail catastrophically. And in the environment today, we've got to keep doing that on both sides of the house. So I think there's still good opportunity ahead for us. I can't hear you, John. So yeah.
One of the people I follow on BlueSky, by the way, plug. I see a lot of really good discussion moving from LinkedIn, especially Twitter over there. Is Rob Joyce, so the former head of the NSA, and his response. He believe he testified in a congressional subcommittee that I think his term for the CISA firings was quote devastating unquote.
Yeah.
And you posted something recently that was basically they fired a bunch of them. Now they're having trouble finding them to hire them back, right? So over here, there's a lot of, for the organizations that are used to dealing with American counterparts, there was always already a certain amount of, not us versus them, but I think difference in focus, difference in interests, difference in stakeholder organizations. And now there's this even at this tactical operational level that you mentioned, there's really a question: is there, first of all, going to be the capability to engage with, right? And second of all, is there going to be the trust? Right. I think I'm going to be really provocative here because, I'm obviously seeing this from a distance, right? We're through the lens of social media, of news. Having just visited the US for 2 weeks, I was in California, right? So we are seeing this very much through a filtered lens and wondering basically what the hell is happening. And in terms of information and particularly intelligence sharing, right? And there's I'm building up to something here. I think a lot of the not only European agencies but the other G7 countries and Five Eyes intelligence sharing partners, not to speak of the global international companies in critical sectors, are really wondering, not only can we depend on these formerly very active partners, but should we actually be sharing intelligence
Yeah.
with them? You
Yeah.
know?
I think you're right on. And so, look, again, not saying this politically, I think we should sort of look and see where we are and understand our current reality as we best can understand it. And so while I think within the US, I think there still will be efforts to share information, I do worry about the chilling of international information sharing. Will Five Eyes survive, right? As we look today, the stress between the US and Ukraine, the way Europe's rallied to support Ukraine and Canada as we're
I obviously have my sympathies. So.
yeah, that's right. That's right. But I mean, as the world sees us, embrace Russia's leader as a fellow great leader, as a director of national intelligence, as the leaders of the FBI, as others build relationships with folks that maybe we haven't historically had as much trust and confidence with, right? Again, not being critical of that, the administration is going to do what they think is best, but that I think will have an effect because I think England and Canada and France and Germany and others are going to look and say, I don't know if we're comfortable sharing with you if you're perhaps sharing with them. And that's a legitimate concern.
That's been a concern for several years.
Yeah.
Back in 2017, 18, there was that notorious meeting in the Oval Office with Lavrov and was Kislyak, I think, where there was rumors about submarine deployments being shared, and now it's obviously we're seeing a tremendous ramping up of European defense investment and capabilities.
Yeah.
Not only that, but also these being increasingly focused on European services providers, just because there's a worry that can we depend on this, And with one of the interesting things that we're also seeing is there's an increasing. We were very, very slow on the trigger with the Ukrainians, right? We should have been funding them far earlier because in addition to being the right thing to do, it would have been a far more economical proposition to nip this thing in the bud early.
Yeah.
Whatever, right? Here we are. It's going to be it's my taxes that are going to pay for this. I'm fine with that. But there is arguably an existential threat that is literally on our borders. You guys have an ocean.
Yeah.
At the same time, where we are able to benefit from these increased information sharing and capabilities partnerships with our Ukrainian partners, they've been part of, for example, the Locked Shield cyber defense exercise since I think it was 21, 22.
Yeah.
Which is astounding, especially given the rhetoric around Ukraine and NATO. And so it's going to be extremely. I'm going to use the term interesting comes to mind, not necessarily in a good way. It's going to be fascinating to see where this develops.
It is. And you look at, Mark Carney, right? Canada's new PM. His first stop is Europe, right? He's letting the U.S. and the world know. Look, our relationship is still strong. So,
and he's invited Zelensky to the G7.
Yeah, that's right. And so as we
I don't think it's going to make him wear a suit either. Sorry,
don't get me started. But I think it's telling because we can keep the Five Eyes relationship, right? It can still exist, but will it be as active and robust? If you look to CISA. Former director Jen Easterly, she was very active in engaging international partners and trying to break down barriers and build trust at a leadership level and bringing staff along to bring it. Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm not saying that won't happen, but I don't know that it will happen. And at the higher levels, there could be concern that, hey, we can keep Five Eyes, but also some things we're going to share without the United States, right? Maybe. And that just, if we're not effectively sharing information, we're all worse off. Right, we're all worse off at that point.
But again, under one of the very first things that you mentioned when you were talking about ISACs was norms and rules and trust,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Trust is extremely difficult and time consuming to build and very easy and quick to break down,
Yeah.
right? One of the, I don't know if you guys are catching it, one of the big discussions right now is I know we're focused on cybersecurity, but I'm an avid follower as a lifelong civilian with a book with a with a shelf full of military history books, armchair admiral, here. Um, one of the big discussions right now is about European purchase of U.S. military hardware and services,
Yeah.
right? And Portugal just canceled its F-35 acquisition because there are worries about, is there a kill switch built in? And even the British, who are the only European tier one design partner for the F-35 program, are worried about this. Right now, we're talking about, for example, is the Gripen, is the Swedish 4.5 gen, I guess, fighter, is it an option? Well, it's running General Electric engines, right? What are from an information management and functionality perspective, what is the possibility that somebody actively hostile to European defense goals could sabotage that?
Yeah.
This goes even further, and I want to quickly, the reason I mentioned this defense stuff is I want to mention Starlink, right? This is obviously a huge topic. There's, we're not going to go into the whole background of Starlink in Ukraine and turning things off or on, or is it trustworthy or not? But there's just the announcement in the Guardian and a few other outlets that it's been installed in the White House,
Yep.
right? The U.S. government and military have always had a reputation for being extremely security conscious, and all of a sudden, with all of the doubt behind potential conflicts of interest, we're seeing, okay, well, there's this satellite service. Why? Right? What does that imply?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of questions, and it does start to get to the point where it's hard to separate the political aspect and the political biases and the reality of the threats and who's doing what, and it makes everything more complex. I think we're going to see more alternatives to Starlink develop rather quickly, right? I think that's
Europe, I think France and Italy and a few others are already working on
yeah,
some.
and Mexico and others, I think, are all looking at alternatives. So that's one, but the broader challenge, regardless of what party has been in office in the United States, the international partnerships have been enduring.
Mhm.
My worry right now is that if the rest of the world, if our longtime allies don't see us as reliable, not
Yeah,
just in whoever's in the White House today, but if our policy is going to be so different from administration to administration, right? Regardless of whether it's President Trump or
that's
President Biden or
exactly
whoever comes next, if we're not going to be consistent and reliable, that makes it hard to build enduring relationships based on trust. And so I do worry that like NATO interoperability, will we continue to be able to be a part of that if we're not seen as a reliable long-term partner? And again, when we start taking the U.S. out of the equation of some of these conversations, potentially, it does weaken all of us, right? But the world requires consistency,
it.
reliability, and again, not a political statement. It's just I don't know if that's going to endure the way it has in the past.
Well, this is I like to think of the deep state as actually not a bad thing, you
Yeah,
know. And you mentioned the FBI earlier. The FBI has always been extremely think of them what you will. They've been an extremely reliable partner in disruption activities against cybercrime actors. There's a couple where they assisted, for example, Romanian law enforcement a couple of years ago in taking out some fraud gangs, right? And the AFP in Australia, Interpol out of Singapore, arguably Europol, who've been really upping their game over the last few years, should have been picking up this role a lot more actively, and they are, but it would be a huge loss if these agencies, like for example the FBI, were no longer reliable. It's a good maybe it's ripping off the band-aid for us. One of the
yeah,
free tropes is that we've been lazy in Europe. We've but the saying, right, that the best time was yesterday, the second best time is today.
yeah,
So I think that also in the cybersecurity collaboration space is something that we're seeing, not just Europe pick up. What really worries me is that, unlike in the defense arena, where we've seen a lot of activity and budgeting and capabilities growth, in the cybersecurity collective defense arena, I've not seen anything near the level of increased activity and coordination that I think we should have.
Yeah.
right? It's still, over here, it still occasionally feels like a very clubby, very, very, very comfortable, club. We're not we're not seeing this, especially one of our major adversaries, obviously, very openly is Russia.
Yeah.
My philosophies and views aside, this is a state actor that is engaged not only in sponsoring and abetting cybercrime and fraud and disinformation, information manipulation, but active
And
sabotage.
murder in European soil. I mean,
Yeah, murder. And they tried to whack the CEO of one of the biggest German defense contractors. They've lit fires in munition plants. This is not hypothetical,
right,
right?
right.
Dredging up Baltic Sea data cables, topic near and dear to my heart. But it's a bit worrisome that I don't get the sense of urgency around the cybersecurity collaboration space over here that I think we've seen with the actual shooty bang bang side of things.
Yeah, and it's a good concern. I think information sharing, like security, like resilience, need to be institutionalized, right? If we're relying on, hey, John and Andy know each other, and they'll do the right thing, they'll help each other out, they'll share. John's going to help Andy if he's an incident. He'll come in, he can boost him up during the crisis. Like that's great, and personal relationships are vital in any community, but they're not necessarily enduring, right? And you've got to institutionalize these relationships, these processes from your security team, right? How do we respond to an incident? How do we triage an incident? How do we escalate? How do we notify, right? It's got to be institutionalized. There's got to be plans, there's got to be exercise, there's got to be processes that we can rely upon, and we know how it's going to be done. Up to the leadership level, where leaders have to know what to expect and what they're supposed to do and be able to do it effectively, to within our sectors, within our nation, within our nations. Like these things have to be formalized and institutionalized. If we rely on goodwill and the fact that there's a great informal security community that will work to get things done as they did during WannaCry, we're not sure that's going to work, right? We don't know that's going to work again effectively. So, taking these things seriously, recognizing the threat, calling out the reality that Russia still operates as an adversarial threat to Europe, Canada, the United States, Australia, and other parts of the world. Like we have to be able to say that. Like you have to be able to name it and take appropriate action to bolster security and defenses to be able to mitigate those threats and risks. If we're not willing to call it out, then we're not taking that threat seriously. And then we've got to invest in those resources, just like the security team needs to be invested in. It's like you've got to hire a good CISO. It's like you've got to bring in the tools and people. Institutions need to build in information sharing protocols and the way to share information between our nations. It's got to occur. And you're right. Like, I don't know if Europe's done it to the level they should be and need to. And I don't know if we're going to be able to do that internationally the way we have been and should be doing.
Well, I mean, it's a very, very good point that you mentioned about institutionalization. I just, no matter how much, I think of it kind of as what I call PowerPoint mentality. Yeah, we absolutely should document these processes and make them as part of rules and norms. It still very often does come down to who knows whom.
Yeah.
I know so and so. So you mentioned, for example, Jen Easterly, right? I mean, she was a very, kind of a maddened figure that a lot of these initiatives could coalesce around because she's a known quantity, she's dependable, she's competent, she's a frequent public speaker. And there's a few of these people all around the world in various companies and governments, And unfortunately, a lot of these people still are the kind of the linchpins of a lot of the information sharing and trust efforts when there really should be more of a formalized set of processes and forums and mechanisms for companies to engage in and governance,
Yeah.
not just persons.
And that's part of the worry back here in the U.S., John, I think is, excuse me, as we see personnel sent off to retire early, we see people leaving government service, that, excuse me, that deep state that you talked about, that institutional knowledge and experience is really critical because as political appointees come and go, as administrations come and go, those tried and true bureaucrats who we like to mock and tease, they provide stability and continuity in these activities, right? And so you're not relying solely upon the charismatic leader, the great, strong leader, but you've got relationships
or the dependable technician, the technocrat, the intel analyst, these people that for a lot of companies. And by the way, I'm going to just a call to action. If there is a CXO listening to this, you're going to have people in your organization that cost you a lot of money, that have been there for ages. Keep paying them, trust them, send them to conferences, even if it doesn't immediately seem productive to you, because these are the people that a lot of this collective defense gels around.
That's right. And those relationships, those networking events and informal relationships are what makes everything work when we've got to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, or hit somebody up in Signal and be like, look, I've got this going on. You can have that conversation, and you can't do that if you're sitting behind your desk on your own all the time. So yeah, it really is important in that institutional knowledge. Because I am a little concerned about that. I am concerned if we do lose, people that serve this nation for a long time. I'm worried that we're not going to be as effective domestically or their international partners because those points of contact, those trusted relationships might not be there. And that's disappointing.
I would suggest that we've got a few minutes, and you had a something for me, so I want to keep some time for that. I have no idea. You keep teasing me with ask you things, but I'd like to play a short little game.
Okay, all right.
What are well, you go first. I'll go after. What do you see as your right off the top of your head, your three biggest immediate threats to individuals, companies, liberal democratic societies that are facing us right now?
Are we talking within cybersecurity or just
cybersecurity related?
Yeah,
Information security. Keep it a bit broader.
yeah, I think if you ask me this in an hour, I'll probably give you a different answer. But because we're talking about some of these topics, they're top of mind for me. But I think right now, today, I think the information sharing piece is really critical, right? And maintaining trust, reliability, and continuing to progress down a positive path in our ability to share information is just a question right now that I have concerns about, right? Because we're seeing some pause, hesitation, separation within governments and within industry, like we said, and that's a concern to me, because if we can't do it, if there is a war, if China does go to take Taiwan, if Russia decides, hey, why not Moldova next? Whatever might come next, if we're not sharing information effectively, we're all vulnerable. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that. On the big threats piece, rather than look at the threats, I'm still concerned a little bit about some of what you talked about earlier, the underinvestment, right? Like there's really good and talented people out there, but we're not necessarily empowering them to do the things they need to do. We have to manage it, right? You don't buy every new shiny tool, right? Every cybersecurity vendor has a shiny new portal resource, zero trust model, whatever it is that they're going to try and sell you. But some of it is critical. And we still see organizations, this has happened a couple times in the last couple months, and haven't yet implemented multi-factor authentication. Like, for the love of God, like, why have you not implemented multi-factor authentication at this point? And so we're not investing necessarily in the people and the fundamental tools that we need to just to be baseline secure. That's a concern, right? That's a concern, because that opens up a whole host of threats and risks. It doesn't matter what the threat is, the opportunity to take advantage of organizations is there. So I think the information sharing piece is a big one. I think proper investment is a big one. And I think we're still working on leadership fully understanding the importance of the cybersecurity, information security environment, right? And what it means to the business. It's no longer, the IT team. It's no longer just going to be isolating the organization. It's got a cascading effect across the entire organization and operation. It's got cascading effects to clients and new business. And we have a cascading effect coming from our vendors and supply chain. If we don't understand those, if we don't build in resilience and redundancy, if we understand how we operate in a degraded situation, we're setting ourselves up for a disaster. And so I think we still need to work on bolstering those areas, and leadership needs to be the ones to understand it and to authorize the resources to do what we need to do to maintain resilience. We're not going to be where, geeks like you and me might want everybody to be, but we can do better. And I think it's really going to continue to take, boards applying pressure to leadership. It's going to take leaders applying pressure to executives, saying this is what we need to do, and this is why, making the logical case for it. And I think those are three areas. Again, asking an hour and I'll have three different answers for you, but I think those are three important ones.
That's nice of you to say geeks. I don't think I've qualified I don't think I've qualified as a geek. I don't have the clue anymore. So from my side, I'd say in no particular order, and I think first one is largely a product of where I am, and that is disinformation. And again, that's why I'd say information security threats and not cybersecurity. Disinformation, manipulation, whether it is at an individual level, whether it is at a societal level. I think this is far more of an issue than large, for example, state actor campaigns, any given cybercrime campaign, any given malware campaign. For example, we saw the trick disruption a couple of years ago that was Microsoft led. After a few years, these guys popped up again somewhere else. It's serious. It's a tactical issue. Sometimes they cause real damage, but I think the real big problem right now at a systemic level is the manipulation of opinions through legitimate news channels, through social media, the lack of responsibility of social media and accountability of social media entities, particularly, and tech entities more broadly, and the ability to basically undermine and destabilize, entire societies and the democratic processes. The second one for me is I would meet you on the investment, the underinvestment. I think that's absolutely critical. And again, my wife is senior manager at a big organization. She would rip my head off. What, you want me to spend more? I get it, but as one of my employees many years ago once put it, there is an enormous technology and capability debt that many of these companies have incurred. It's going to take decades to remediate. And I think especially given the increasing, for example, state actor threats that we have, these massive campaigns, it's Chinese APT groups, Russian sponsored baddies, even the Iranians are still running around doing things. But also, your run-of-the-mill stuff. You mentioned lack of MFA. We have how many small to medium enterprises don't have basic securities control in place? And what year is this?
Yeah, exactly.
But how do we? It's not even just the underinvestment. It's how do we reconcile, the need to spend more money with the fact that you just don't have a budget for it, right? How do we make this easier? And this kind of segues into my third one. This for me is a huge one, and I'm gonna call it AI. Even though AI is just kind of an avatar of the fundamental problem. It is this idea that we have had since the dawn of the internet that any given technology or technological capability can be a panacea, can be a one size fits all cure for everything. One of the things I've been ranting about on LinkedIn recently to broken record time is I find hilarious when you see these people saying AI is doing all of my coding.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
Right. Oh my God. Is it the same people that are going into big banks or big industrial companies and saying, well, waterfall testing, how antiquated. We deployed a prod, right? Like security, what? Security controls? That's, let's get you to bed, Grandpa.
Yeah.
This is really worrisome. We have this tech ecosystem which does not seem to understand the nature of critical industry and the impact on society that a systemic set of failures can have that are engendered by using immature technologies or technologies wrongly, without properly, maybe going back to your investment point, without properly investing the time, the skills, the money to secure these, to develop and deploy these in a thoughtful, methodical manner. I think this has the potential to expose significant chunks of the critical industry ecosystem to a vast array of threats, whether it's, resilience risk, things just crash, to cyber attacks, to fraud, to scams, to what have you, right? Even if it's going to cost you a whole lot more money to test the damn code because nobody can read this AI generated gobbledygook.
Yeah.
That for me is because I think a lot of CFOs are looking, for example, at LLMs and saying, oh, cool, I can fire a bunch of my tech people and I can just do everything with AI. No, you damn well can't, right? Yeah. I think the penalties for failure, you mentioned earlier people getting fired, that rarely happens. People get their bonuses, they move on, and then maybe 3 or 4 years down the line, the failure actually hits. What are the penalties for that? Very rarely do people actually suffer the consequences for that. I think this kind of irresponsibility, both from the tech industry and from the management and consultants that advocate for implementing these super sexy, shiny one size fits all panacea. I use the term panacea very liberally. Yeah. That is, for me, it's both a risk and a threat. And I think so. Those are kind of my three biggies.
Yeah, I think those are great. And just your last one, I think we both probably agree that it's not that we don't want innovation and new technology. Like there's like it's great,
Oh
but it's
yeah.
sort of like I'm a dumb guy. I still like
I
to
love
look.
my I love my iPhone. Like
Yeah,
face recognition, it's magic.
yeah. But fundamentals are still critical, right? And so it's like
Yes.
with in exercise and fitness today, there's a lot of new ideas, and do this for your nutrition, do this for your diet, do this for your workouts. It still comes back down to basics, right? You do certain fundamental lifts, you eat a certain amount of calories, you consume more if you want to gain weight, less if you want to lose weight. Like it's fundamentals. All the other stuff is nice, but it's complementary. And I think in the
Yes.
security environment, it's very similar, where there's a lot of silver bullets being sold that aren't silver bullets. And there's some really great ideas out there, especially when we throw around the term AI now, because everybody wants to integrate AI in everything they're selling, and it's great, but like get your fundamentals down. Like what? How do you? What are your controls so you don't have this email compromise, right? Like what are
And
fundamental controls?
fundamentals are boring.
Yeah, that's right. They are. They're critical, but they're critical. Just you want to get stronger. Go do some squats, right? Squats are boring. They stink, but they make you stronger. Same thing, right? Go to your fundamentals.
Always remember, planks hate you too.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to wrap it, John. Planks
Yeah.
hate you too.
So you want to ask me something? What do you got
I
for
did.
me?
Let me just real quick. So when we wrap up the Gate 15 interviews, I typically like to ask my guests what I call three questions, right? To ask three questions that you're not prepared for, just
I
to get
asked
to
you
know
mine.
you. Yeah, you asked me yours, and I appreciate it. These are a little bit more like, who is John? So I'm going to ask you three ones. You just answer the first thing that comes to mind. Makes sense, doesn't make sense, whatever. It doesn't matter. So last month, I had a great guest on. We talked security, ransomware, comic books. I love comics. I love origin stories. So just real quickly, how did you get here? What's your origin story, John?
I wasted all my time at college playing with Unix boxes because I played a game called NetTrek, and instead of actually doing anything useful, and those tended to crash, so I got into sysadmin because I had to figure out how to reboot it. And then in my first job, remember, I was privileged to get into this industry when you got a job if you could spell IT and you had a pulse. And then somebody dropped a firewall book on my desk. I think it was Firewalls and Internet Security, and said, "Congratulations, you're the security expert. We're seeing a client in 30 minutes." And that's kind of been the story of my life. It's all been like completely random and weird. And yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
I'd go hang out with my cats or run a B&B if I had the chance.
No, it's funny. 'Cause last month I had Alan on. He was my guest, and he had a very similar sort of. He got into IT because he went under and plugged something into the wall, and that started. Okay,
What?
we got you got now.
You're gonna give me money to do this stuff? How
Yeah.
cool.
All right, that's good. So next one, John. You've been all over the place. You've been across Europe and the States. I'm guessing other spots around this messy mud ball we call home. If you had to pick up and settle somewhere not in Europe and not in North America, where would you go and why?
I would go back to the top of the volcano on Reunion Island, which is the one place I've been in my life where there was absolute silence without plugging your ears, where the world falls away from you on all sides and you think you're just basically at the top of a big pimple on the planet, and it is just quiet.
Yeah.
There's not an ambient sound anywhere around you, and it is the most this was 20 plus years ago, and it was the single most peaceful, magnificent place I've ever been to. It's an absolute moonscape. But man, that was an almost a spiritual experience.
Yeah, that can be beautiful. Silence can be beautiful. I'll give you a much shorter version of that, but perhaps equally beautiful and differently in intensity is jumping out of an airplane. I mean, you first jump out of an airplane and your chute opens. It's beautiful silence, and
More for you, more for you, man.
but it's beautiful and it's quiet. It's taking in this incredible view, and then you have to deal with the reality that you're plummeting quickly towards the earth, and you've got to get ready for that. But in those few seconds, it seemed to last longer than they really are. Man, it is a beautiful moment.
I will take your word for that. I don't like heights. Just real quick, I do want to give a plug to a close second, which is at the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, looking up at the night sky.
Yeah.
It's one of the driest places on Earth. I'm an astronomy geek, so I'm really into it. And it is so dark there that when you look up at the Milky Way, the you understand why the Inca Their constellations were not imaginary lines between stars that a bunch of drunken Greeks put together, in fever fantasies. Their constellations are not only culturally relevant, so the jaguar, the llama, etc., but they're actually comprised of the dust clouds in the Milky Way, so the dark spots. It is so bright that you see the actual dark areas, and they kind of imagined in their alcoholic fever dreams, they imagine the shapes in those. So if you ever get a chance, if you're ever privileged enough to do that, check it out, man.
That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. Well, also let me get one more sort of travel idea from you. So last one, most of our listeners on Gate 15 side are US based. We got some in Europe, but most are US based. For someone who may be considering a trip to Europe, what's a favorite place or experience you'd say, hey, if you're going to do one thing, do this?
Good Lord. Oh, where to start, man? The one thing I did recently, which was amazing, is the Semana Santa, the Easter celebrations in southern Spain, especially. It's even if you're not into the whole religious thingy, I'm absolutely not. It's pretty amazing, when they carry these gigantic, floats with religious figures.
Yeah.
It's about 60 guys underneath these things, and they weigh about 5 or 6 tons.
Yeah.
And they're dancing to the music, and they have these huge marching bands playing these religious marches, but they're kind of bangers, and they're dancing these things to them.
Yeah.
Top of any given mountain in the Alps, taking a high-speed train across the French countryside, the Atlantic coast when the waves are battering you, any of the mountaintop villages, and you can go on, going up the hillsides in Montenegro when it's basically vertical from the ocean to the mountains and you go above the clouds. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Fair. That's fair. There's a lot to enjoy and take in. John, those are my 3 questions. I think I'll stop there. I know we got to wrap up, but thanks for letting me join you. This has been fun to do, and I'm glad we can take time to do it.
So we've hosted each other, and I'd love to do it again someday. Thanks a lot, Andy. Take care of yourself. It's good seeing you again.
You too, John. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us in this latest edition of the Secure in Mind podcast series, courtesy of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network/media and /blog for additional episodes and articles. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, SoundCloud, Podcast Republic, and iTunes, and don't hesitate to get in touch. Stay safe, stay smart, stay educated, and stay secure.